The night Daniel Carter gave away his coat was the coldest winter night the city had seen in years. The streets were nearly empty, wrapped in a silence broken only by the wind cutting between tall buildings. Snow clung to the sidewalks, hardened by hours of freezing air, and every breath fell sharp in his lungs. Daniel had just finished a late shift and was walking home through the park he crossed every night. His coat was old, the zipper unreliable, but it kept him warm enough through many winters. He kept his head down, hands buried in his pockets, focused on getting home. That was when he noticed her. She sat alone on a bench near the frozen fountain, shoulders hunched, her body trembling as if the cold had found its way straight into her bones. At first, Daniel slowed but kept walking. The city taught you not to get involved. Everyone had problems. Then she lifted her hands. They were bare, red, shaking. Daniel stopped. "Hey," he said quietly, not wanting to startle her. "Are you okay?" She looked up, eyes glossy with tears she hadn't tried to hide. Her face carried a kind of exhaustion Daniel recognized too well. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice cracked. Without thinking, Daniel unzipped his coat and slipped it off, stepping closer and holding it out. "You're freezing," he said. "Please." She hesitated, then wrapped the coat around herself. Warmth spread across her face as her shoulders relaxed. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel nodded and turned away, walking back into the cold, never imagining that this single moment would change his life forever. Daniel's life had been quiet for years, contained within routines that gave him comfort. He lived alone in a small apartment above a closed bakery, worked maintenance at a downtown office building, and avoided attention whenever possible. 5 years ago, his wife had passed away, leaving a silence that he had learned to live within. He didn't expect surprises. He didn't expect life to deliver anything beyond the ordinary. Meanwhile, across the city, the woman from the park had returned home in a sleek black car, Daniel's coat folded neatly beside her. Her name was Evelyn Ross, billionaire, CEO, one of the most powerful women in the city. To everyone else, she was untouchable, commanding respect and authority effortlessly. But tonight, stripped of the armor she usually wore, she felt small, fragile, just a woman in the cold. The anniversary of her mother's death weighed heavily on her, and a board meeting that morning had left her drained. She had walked out of the office with no plan, just the desire to feel something real, even if only for a few minutes. That's when she had found herself in the park, freezing and alone, until Daniel appeared. He hadn't asked who she was. He hadn't hesitated. He had simply seen someone in need and acted. Evelyn traced her fingers over the sleeve of his coat, realizing she had never felt such warmth from a stranger before. "He didn't even ask my name," she murmured to her assistant. Her assistant blinked. "Find him," Evelyn said softly. "I want to thank him properly." Daniel, asleep in his apartment, had no idea that this encounter would soon pull him into a life far beyond anything he had imagined. 2 weeks later, Daniel was repairing a flickering light on the 14th floor when he heard murmurs among the staff that the building owner was visiting. He didn't pay much attention. Executives came and went all the time. They rarely noticed people like him, and he preferred it that way. Then the elevator doors opened. She stepped out. Evelyn Ross, tailored coat, perfectly poised, but with a subtle warmth in her eyes that made Daniel's chest tighten. The room seemed to shrink around her presence. She scanned the floor, and then her gaze landed on him. "Daniel," she said softly, reading his name badge. He froze. "You?" She smiled, not the polished, meteor-ready smile the public loved, but a quiet, genuine one meant just for him. "You gave me your coat," she said. "I never got to thank you properly." Executives nearby glanced around, confused. Evelyn held up a hand. "Give us a moment." They stepped aside without question. She extended the coat, freshly cleaned and folded. "I kept this. I wanted to return it myself." Daniel hesitated. "I didn't even know who you were." "That's why it mattered," she replied. You saw a person in need, not a title. They talked briefly, carefully, but the connection between them was undeniable. Before leaving, she paused and asked, "Would you like to have coffee sometime?" Daniel swallowed hard. A simple yes would pull him into a world he never imagined. He nodded. Yes. And with that one moment, two completely separate lives began to cross paths in ways neither of them could have foreseen. Their first coffee should have been awkward. It wasn't. They spoke slowly at first, carefully testing the unfamiliar ground between them. Daniel talked about his work, about fixing things most people never noticed until they broke. Evelyn listened intently, without checking her phone or glancing at the time. She shared parts of her world cautiously, revealing the pressures of leadership, the loneliness of being surrounded by people who wanted something from her, and the isolation that came with wealth and influence. Daniel didn't flinch or judge. He simply listened, and Evelyn felt lighter with each word spoken. Their meetings became more frequent. Coffee turned into walks into dinners. With Daniel, Evelyn felt free, unburdened by the expectations of the public, away from the constant scrutiny. With Evelyn, Daniel felt seen, appreciated, valued in a way he hadn't felt since his wife passed. But the differences in their worlds were impossible to ignore. People stared when they walked together. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when Daniel entered rooms he wasn't meant to be in. At work, Daniel overheard whispers about his unexpected influence on someone important. Evelyn experienced quiet resistance, with advisors and colleagues offering polite warnings about appearances and optics. One evening, as they walked outside her building, Daniel's worry finally escaped. "They're watching you because of me," he said softly. Evelyn didn't deny it. Instead, she took his hand, warm and firm. "Then let them watch," she said. "I won't hide." And in that moment, they both realized that love could be both freeing and terrifying all at once. Daniel didn't plan to pull away, but it happened gradually. He answered texts slower, canceled a few dinners, and gave excuses that sounded reasonable but fell hollow. He told himself it was temporary, that he needed space to think. Evelyn noticed immediately. "Talk to me," she said one quiet evening. "Don't disappear." Daniel sighed. "I don't belong in your world," he admitted. She stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "You belong with me," she whispered. Belonging, though, wasn't simple. At work, Daniel overheard subtle remarks and curious glances. At home, he replayed each warning, each suggestion that their relationship was risky, that he didn't fit her life. He loved her, but the pressure of their worlds felt heavy. Finally, he made a decision. He resigned, packed his things quietly, leaving before fear or doubt could stop him. Evelyn found out hours later. She drove straight to his apartment. When she knocked, Daniel opened the door, expecting tension. "You left," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I had to," Daniel admitted. "I love you, but I won't be the reason anyone hurts you or tries to control your life." Her eyes filled with tears. "You don't get to decide that alone," she said softly. "I won't be your weakness," he murmured. They stood in silence, both realizing that love sometimes hurt more than loneliness when fear was allowed to speak louder than hope. The boardroom was calm, controlled, and merciless. Every word was measured, every glance calculated. Advisors and board members spoke in polite tones, but the message was clear. Her relationship with Daniel was a risk. "This relationship threatens the company," one said quietly. "End it before it escalates." Evelyn listened without interrupting. She thought of the park, the bench, the freezing night when a stranger had given her warmth without knowing her name. She remembered the kindness, the simplicity of it. That memory strengthened her resolve. "I built this company," she said slowly, standing tall, "but I didn't build it to erase who I am." The room shifted uncomfortably. Ultimatums were delivered politely but firmly, highlighting consequences, market perception, even stockholders' opinions. Evelyn nodded, letting each warning sink in. Then she made her choice. She walked out. News spread almost instantly. Critics questioned her judgment. The media speculated. Some employees whispered about scandal. Yet many admired her courage. She had chosen humanity over appearances. She didn't wait. She drove straight to Daniel's apartment. When he opened the door, she said one thing: "I chose truth." Daniel stared at her, disbelief and relief colliding. "You gave it all up?" She shook her head. "I didn't give anything up. I kept what matters." Tears filled his eyes as understanding and relief settled in. That night, fear loosened its grip. For the first time, they stood together on equal ground, not defined by titles or fear, but by choice. Love didn't fix everything overnight. Doubt surfaced. Old fears tried to creep back in. But this time they stayed. They learned to communicate, to listen, to trust. With every small act, the bond grew stronger, steady, unshakable. Evelyn stepped back from control, allowing vulnerability. Daniel stepped forward with confidence, no longer shrinking to fit expectations. Together, they began creating something new, restoring neglected community spaces across the city. It wasn't glamorous work, and no one knew their names were attached, but it mattered. Daniel rebuilt structures with his hands, finding satisfaction in tangible progress. Evelyn opened doors quietly, funding programs without seeking credit. They worked side by side, balancing leadership and labor, learning to lead together rather than separately. Some nights were quiet, reflective. Some were heavy, as doubt and exhaustion pressed in. But honesty and shared purpose guided them. Daniel realized he didn't need to diminish himself to belong. Evelyn understood she didn't need armor to feel strong. One evening, standing in the half-restored community center, Daniel looked around, his chest warm with pride and love. "I never imagined a life like this," he said quietly. Evelyn smiled, eyes soft. "Neither did I," she replied. They didn't need perfection. They needed presence, compassion, and shared determination. By choosing each other daily, without fear, they built something stronger than wealth, stronger than ambition. And in that quiet, persistent work, they found love not as a headline, but as a lived, tangible reality. Years later, winter returned. Snow dusted the streets and trees, and the city carried a quiet stillness that reminded Daniel and Evelyn of the night they first met. They walked together through the park, their breaths visible in the crisp air. It felt familiar, safe, and strangely magical. The bench was still there, the same one where Daniel had first offered his coat. Evelyn paused and sat down, letting the memories wash over her. She laughed softly, a sound full of warmth. "This is where everything changed," she said, her eyes glinting with emotion. Daniel pulled the coat from his arm and draped it around her shoulders. Though years had passed, it still carried that first night's warmth. Evelyn looked at him, a mix of gratitude and wonder in her eyes. "You saved me that night," she said, voice trembling. Daniel shook his head, smiling. "No," he replied gently. "You were already strong. I just showed up when you needed it." They stood together, snow falling lightly around them, unnoticed by the bustling city. Daniel knelt, holding her hands in his. "I never asked life for much," he said quietly. "Just honesty, warmth, and love." Evelyn's tears spilled freely as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Always yes." That night, they didn't need the world to recognize them. They didn't need approval or applause. In the quiet park where it all began, they had found each other, and that was more than enough. Their wedding was quiet. No cameras, no speeches, no expectation of applause. They chose simplicity, surrounded by only a handful of people who had seen them at their most human, friends and family who mattered. No titles, no achievements, only names and promises. Daniel stood at the altar, thinking about the man he once was, tired, careful, afraid to hope. He had survived life's storms, never chasing success or love, only getting through each day. Yet now, looking at Evelyn, he felt fully alive. Evelyn, tears slipping freely down her cheeks, had spent years surrounded by power, wealth, and influence, yet had never felt seen in the way she felt now. Standing beside Daniel, she finally understood what it meant to be grounded, to belong without fear or performance. After the ceremony, they walked through the city unnoticed. No bowing, no whispers, just the quiet intimacy of two lives now joined. Their daily life was simple but intentional. Morning coffee together, shared responsibilities, quiet evenings filled with laughter and conversation. Daniel never asked for wealth. Evelyn never sought applause. Together, they created a life built on love, trust, and presence, not power or recognition. In choosing each other every day, they discovered that happiness was not about grand gestures or headlines, but the quiet, steady moments that make life meaningful. That choice, made over time, changed everything. Daniel kept the coat. Not because it was warm, not because it was expensive, but because it reminded him of who he was before everything changed. It was a symbol of a night that started quietly, simply, with a small act of kindness that grew into something extraordinary. Sometimes, he held it and remembered that freezing park bench, the snow swirling around them, the woman who looked as though she carried the weight of the world. He hadn't planned to change her life. He hadn't planned to change his own. He had simply done what felt right. Evelyn often said that night saved her, but Daniel knew it was more than rescue. It was recognition. Two people crossing paths at the exact moment they needed to be seen. Love didn't arrive with drama. It arrived gently, through courage, presence, and small choices. Daniel never asked for more than warmth, honesty, and connection. Life answered with partnership, purpose, and love. All of it began with one simple act: giving away a coat to someone in need. Snow fell lightly outside their home as Daniel and Evelyn stood together, hands intertwined, hearts full. That single moment of kindness had changed the course of their lives, proving that love often starts in the quietest, most unexpected ways. Subscribe for more heartwarming tales about love, courage, and second chances.